This week on ANN, rallying support for an American pastor imprisoned in Iran.
The Czech Republic compensates Adventists for past property damage.
And members worldwide prepare for a day of prayer in May.
These stories and more coming up.
This is ANN, a service of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church. Thanks so much for joining us this week.
First in the news, the International Religious Liberty Association has joined religious groups and human rights advocates calling for the release of the American pastor Saeed Abedini. The Christian pastor was imprisoned in Iran in September after government officials convicted him of jeopardizing national security. Abedini occasionally traveled to his native Iran, where he managed an orphanage and, according to some reports, helped Christians in underground churches. Reports now indicate that officials are attempting to force Abedini to deny his Christian faith. Established by the Adventist Church, the IRLA is the latest organization to express support for the pastor. In recent weeks, the U.S. State Department, Congress, and the White House have each called for Abedini's release.
The International Religious Liberty Association has as its core principle to defend the rights of all people to believe or not to believe or to worship as they see fit. As Seventh-day Adventists, we want those same rights because we're a minority religion in many parts of the world, and we want to be able to worship without fear of government interference or persecution. I believe it's our Christian duty to stand for the rights of all people to worship according to their own conscience.
The Adventist Church in the Czech Republic is set to receive $45 million in reparations from the government to be paid over the next 30 years. The payments are meant to compensate the church for property confiscated during the country's former communist regime. Adventist officials in Prague say the regime seized the church's holdings in 1952. The Adventist Church is one of 16 religious organizations that are sharing more than $3 billion in reparations settlements. The gesture comes after the Czech Parliament approved a restitution plan last year. The Czech Prime Minister called the move an act of justice. The country is the last formerly communist nation in Europe to reach a reparations settlement with religious organizations.
The Adventist Church's Kids in Discipleship program has parents and pastors working together to encourage the spiritual growth of children. The program is finding traction in the church's Southern Africa-Indian Ocean region. Communication Director Paul Charles sent this report.
The goal of discipleship is to make disciples who can then make disciples, teaching them to observe all that Jesus commanded. Disciples cannot be mass-produced. We cannot drop people into a program and see disciples emerge at the end of a production line. It takes time to make disciples. It takes individual personal attention. Realizing this, leaders from all over Southern Africa converged in Johannesburg to participate in the second part of Kids in Discipleship Ministry training. The Kids in Discipleship Ministry equips church congregations, parents, and key mentors to implement the Deuteronomy 6 model of discipleship that will help foster a family's ability to use their gifts for worship, ministry, and mission. Under the leadership of Mrs. Caroline Chola, this ministry has become intentional.
In Discipleship is a ministry that is designed to disciple the children. It helps the parents, the school systems to come up with programs that disciple the children.
The training sessions were facilitated by Pastor Don McLafferty and Jonathan Abrams, who passionately trained leaders and interested participants. Many questions were answered and issues clarified.
It is a ministry and a lifestyle change for mom and dad to disciple their children and live it in their home.
Hope Channel Poland is the newest member to join the Adventist Church's official television network. Broadcast officials say the launch is a testament to the expansion of media ministry in the country. So far, Hope Channel Poland offers 24/7 online programming, but plans are in place to enter local cable and satellite networks. Church leaders in the country say Hope Channel Poland will help lay groundwork for urban outreach planned for Warsaw in 2014.
Adventists worldwide will observe a day of prayer, remembrance, and recommitment to mission on May 18. The event comes during a year when Adventists are celebrating the Church's 150th anniversary. Earlier today, I sat down with Adventist historian David Trim to learn more about plans to observe this emphasis day. Thanks so much for joining us, David.
It's a pleasure.
Why is the Church holding a day of prayer on May 18?
A 150th anniversary, a sesquicentenary, is a major anniversary. It doesn't come around every 100 years, quite literally. And it's an anniversary that church leaders, the church leaders who founded our church would have hoped would never have come. But at the same time, even while we would have hoped to have been in heaven by now, it is a significant anniversary. And this is a chance for us to think about the way God has led us. You know, God has done an awful lot in those 150 years, probably despite us as much as because of us, but there's much to give thanks for and to be thoughtful about.
What are church leaders hoping to accomplish on this emphasis day?
What we're hoping that will come out, Erica, is that people can indeed pause and reflect on what the church has done so far, but we're also hoping that people will look forward as well as back, and that's why it's a day not only of remembrance, but also recommitment to mission. Our church has been here 150 years, but in some ways we've only just begun. There are still so many people who need to hear the good news of the gospel and the proclamation of the third angel's message. So we're hoping our members will look back, but at the same time look forward, that we will express thanks and praise to God for how He's led us so far, but also that we will perhaps repent of the things we've done and the things we haven't done that stand in the way of that proclamation, and that we will, each of us, recommit ourselves to the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
150 years might seem overwhelming to a local church. What would be a good way for members to approach this day?
You know, you're really right there, Erica, and I think local churches should think about not celebrating 150 years globally, think about celebrating in our local church. Talk to the elder members of the church, reconstruct the history of how God has led in your own individual church and in your own individual community. That's the place to start.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Coming up, an Olympic marathoner shares his faith at the finish line.
All day long, I solve problems. It's nuts and bolts and grease. And I love it. But at the end of the day, I think about the world's problems. I wonder why we're all here and how it will end. And I found something that makes sense of it all. Takes the nuts and bolts of history and paints a bigger picture. Now, I have hope.
Welcome back. Let's turn to Claude Rishley for a preview of this month's issue of Adventist World magazine.
This month's story of the cover of Adventist World is a great story. It's the story of a young man whom I noticed for the first time as I was watching the London Olympic Games last year in August. As two athletes were battling it out to make it to the finish line in the marathon, one of them was left behind and crossed the finish line in second position behind a Ugandan runner. As he crossed the line, he dropped on his knees and started to pray. And I thought, wow, this man must be a Christian. Little did I know that he is actually an Adventist. His name is Abel Kirui. I went to meet him in his home in the western part of Kenya, where I met him, his family, and he told me his story of how God had led him to this place, how he entered into a promise with God. He made a promise to God that everywhere he would go, he would want to witness for him and thank him in public for the victories that he would give him. And this is what the public, millions of people around the world could see at these Olympic Games in London. I found a man who is extremely dynamic, who is a leader in many ways, including in his church. As a young man, he was already called the preacher. He has a way of witnessing that has brought people to church, including other top-level athletes. Find all about it in Adventist World in April.
On this month's publishing feature, Howard Figo talks about how the Adventist Church's Literature Evangelism program is impacting lives.
In January 2013, I had the opportunity to visit the South American region and attended 2 region-wide literature evangelist congresses with the theme, Sent to Save. The first congress was held in the North Brazil region with about 200 delegates. The second was in the Central Brazil region with more than 500 delegates. The congresses were attended by literature evangelists, publishing leaders, and administrators from those 2 regions. Programs were designed to prepare and motivate publishing workers to do more in terms of mission. Highlights of the congresses included devotionals focused on revival and reformation, messages geared toward the literature evangelists' calling and their mission, emphasis on the program Rescue Mission, created and presented by the Church in South America, a dedication service for newly licensed and credentialed literature evangelists, and also recognition of literature evangelists with outstanding achievements. The highlight of the Central Brazil region was the baptism of 11 customers from its territory. Among the delegates, 12 had more than 40 years of service, representing more than 500 years of service for the church. In their keynote messages, the presidents of both regions mentioned the importance of literature evangelism. Pastor Leonino Santiago, North Brazil Region President, said, "We want our literature evangelists to be the best workers in the world." Pastor Domingos de Souza, Central Brazil Region President, said, "Literature evangelists are called and sent by God with a mission to save."
For our Adventist social media feature this week, Megan Bronner has the second part of a series on children's online safety.
In the old days, parents warned their children about getting in cars with strangers and refusing candy from people in vans. While those are still very important warnings, today's parents are also making sure to teach online safety to their children as soon as they are old enough to understand. Here are some things to remember when you talk to your children about safety on social media. Social networks have age restrictions for a reason. For instance, Facebook says no one under 13 can have an account. What they post also lasts forever. While the immediacy of social media makes it seem like content comes and goes in a second, they need to understand that anyone can search their entire online history and potentially find embarrassing material. Bullies are online too. Unfortunately, sometimes children and teens take their fights to the internet, which can be very public and very hurtful. Your child should tell you about any bullying as soon as it happens. It's important to choose your friends carefully. Depending on your children's age and responsibility level, you can restrict their friend list to people they know well offline. As they get older, you can talk about adding people they know through other friends. Privacy settings are very, very important. Make sure you and your child understand who can see what they are posting and protect their privacy as much as possible. And lastly, it's important that you follow your children on social networks to watch out for trouble. This can help you have frequent open, honest, non-judgmental conversations about their social media lives.
What do natural disasters, pollution, and climate change mean from a biblical perspective? For author Scott Christensen, the environment holds evidence of end-time events.
Do you need one more reason to believe Jesus is coming soon? Let me tell you about Scott Christensen, the author of Planet in Distress. He served the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, ADRA, in China for 3 years and in Mongolia for 5. He saw signs of the end that many of us might have missed. He observed alarming changes in weather and in food production and water supplies that show our world is truly groaning under a weight of sin. For example, did you know that water shortages in China and Pakistan are so severe that they could cause a war between the countries? Christensen finds that these environmental changes were described in Bible prophecies about the last days. Matthew 24 is one example, not to mention insights from the spirit of prophecy. I should tell you, this book does not come from a political slant. It is spiritually charged. Planted in Distress, from the Review and Herald Publishing Association, tells you how to brace for the crisis that is almost upon us. And there's another thing it does. It builds your anticipation for the soon coming of Jesus.
Children attending Adventist Sabbath School worldwide are learning the benefits of Sabbath observance through the church's GraceLink curriculum. Candy DeVore explains.
The Sabbath is woven into the very fabric of the Bible from the beginning to the end. In the beginning, in Genesis, the Sabbath is the high point of creation week. We're told God blessed the seventh day, and He rested, and we are invited to rest every week too. God taught the Israelites to delight in the Sabbath by sending them enough manna on Friday so they didn't need to collect any on Sabbath, and He even kept it fresh. When Jesus came to earth, He knew how to celebrate Sabbath. He rested, and heaven knows He needed the rest. But He also knew how to enjoy it, not suffer through it under the many rules and regulations the Jewish leaders had imposed. He also saw the Sabbath as a good time to heal people, teach them, and even feed them. The members of the early Christian church looked forward to the Sabbath when they could come together with other believers to worship and pray, share and listen, discuss together, and comfort each other. In the GraceLink lessons, children are taught to see the Sabbath as more than just a doctrine. They learn to appreciate it as a way of life. All the distinctive Seventh-day Adventist doctrines are presented in the GraceLink curriculum, woven into the stories and activities in ways that make sense to kids. Every Sabbath at Sabbath schools around the world, our children come together and learn to love the Sabbath. Through the faithful ministry of teachers and parents, the blessings of this joyful day become a part of the fabric of their lives.
Still ahead on ANN, Adventist filmmakers find a wider audience for their work.
But up next, a preview of this week's Bible study lesson.
Well, I do pray for them, just like my family and friends and neighbors. I pray that I will keep on going through my hard weeks of school. I pray for my little brother. Please pray 7 in the morning, 7 in the evening, 7 days a week.
The Great Controversy Project. Oh, it's difficult for me to say that word, project, because it is far more than a project to me. It is a movement in itself, like a movement within a movement. Don't wait for someone to come to you to ask you for it. Go, seek them out, and share the Great Controversy.
Welcome back. This week's Bible study lesson explores how the institution of marriage helps Christians identify with a Creator God. Mike Ryan has a preview.
This week we continue our study about creation. And this week the lesson is about something very important for our time. It's interesting that as God looked at the creation, He said, you know, there's one thing I didn't do quite right. And He recognized the loneliness of Adam. And therefore He instituted marriage. And I thought it was interesting that God noticed that everything had companionship but Adam. And what a time to bring this in to our study in the Sabbath school lesson. Because when we look around the world today, marriage is something we face every day, and we recognize almost instantly that marriage is an institution that is in trouble. The family is under attack. I think God intended that the relationship between man and woman would have that companionship that He recognizes in the Godhead. And so it brings us today to a point where we can say our marriage helps us identify with the Creator.
Studies indicate that children develop values much like they acquire language skills by modeling after the adults around them. Sostin Mfune explains.
If you tell a child to raise one finger, but in the process you are raising two fingers, oftentimes than not, a child will raise two fingers and not one finger. The child will do what you did and not what you said. In a home, there's no formal class to teach children how to speak. They just catch the language. Values, they are caught more than taught. If you want your children to know how to read the Bible in your home. If you want your children not to argue with their spouses when they grow up, don't argue with your spouse. Live the values you want your children to live when they are grown up.
What's more important, knowing the elements of photography or choosing a great camera? Ansel Oliver has advice for photographers on this week's Tech Corner.
People ask me all the time, what kind of camera should I buy? My answer, one you know how to use. And I don't say that to evade the question. A good photographer can get great photos with a simple camera, but a rookie won't be helped much with a fancier camera. What's more important is to know the elements of a good photograph and how a camera works. To learn, take a class or teach yourself by searching online for photography tips or study books at the library. Another way I answer the question of which camera to buy is to tell the story of National Geographic photographer Sam Abell. Many of the world's top photographers have lots of cameras and lenses for different situations. Sam Abell used a simple camera with a 28mm prime lens, no zoom. And when he teaches workshops, he hardly mentions equipment. He instead talks about emotion and thought and anticipation. Check out his great book, Stay This Moment. Okay, having said all that, if you really want a recommendation, a great little camera is the Nikon Coolpix S9300 or the Canon PowerShot SX260. Both are small point-and-shoot cameras, but they have a decent-sized lens. If you have a larger budget, try the Nikon D90 or the Canon 60D. Even nicer cameras are the Nikon D7000 or the Canon 7D. Then again, you might already have a good enough camera on your mobile device. Remember, your talent matters more than your camera. I wish you great success behind the lens.
Adventist filmmakers are gearing up for the annual Sunscreen Film Festival in the U.S. state of California. We asked Eric Caldwell to find out what festival goers can expect this year.
Well, thank you for being here with us today, Dan. So, the Sunscreen Film Festival, who can participate?
Sunscreen is sponsored by the Adventist Church in North America, and it's open to both students and professional or amateur filmmakers, non-student filmmakers we call them, who want to be part of a celebration of Christians who are filmmakers.
Now, do you have to be from North America to participate, or do you have submissions sometimes from outside of the...
We've had submissions from overseas before, so no, you don't have to be from North America. Pretty much if you go to our website, sunscreen.com, SONSCREEN.com, and you can find the guidelines and the details there about entering the festival.
Great, but just a question about the guidelines. Do these films have to be of a spiritual nature, or do they celebrate other thoughts?
We want them to be of a spiritual nature. We want them to be wholesome and nurturing and have a positive message, a Christian message. But that's pretty much the guidelines that we have right now.
So, do you have any special guests there this year?
Yeah, our keynote speaker is David A.R. White, who's a Christian filmmaker who's worked in Hollywood for a long time. And he's going to talk about some of the challenges of being a Christian working in Hollywood and probably show some samples of his work, and we're really excited about that. And then we're also going to have Jason Satterland is one of our presenters, and he's the director of The Record Keeper, and Rajiv Sigamoni, who's a writer in Hollywood, and then Brian Ballou, who's a director of photography, who's going to be talking about different types of extreme photography and stuff.
Final question. Film, is it really just for entertainment, or can it serve a broader purpose?
I think it serves an incredible purpose. Today's society is a visual society, visual community, and as a church we need to understand ways of communicating to people on various levels in different mediums. Film plays a vital role for reaching out to a broader community outside just the church.
Very good. Thank you again for being here.
Good to be here.
If you want to enter a film in this year's festival, visit sunscreen.com and submit your entry by March 17.
Now let's turn to David Trim for a look at Adventist history. This week, an early Adventist makes the case for the seventh-day Sabbath.
Welcome to This Week in Adventist History. On February 26, in 1944, the first class in Arabic and Islamic studies graduated from the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, then located in Washington, D.C. Led by veteran missionary George Keogh, the innovative program, which trained future missionaries in the Arab language and about Islam, was sadly discontinued after just 3 years for reasons that remain unclear. But its graduates shaped Adventist mission in the Middle East for nearly 20 years into the 1960s. On February 27, in 1916, the building of the International Publishing Association in College View, Nebraska, was destroyed by fire. The association had been founded in September 1903 for the purpose of supplying publications in foreign languages throughout the United States to immigrant communities. It was later taken over by Pacific Press. On February 28, in 1845, Thomas M. Preble, a former Free Will Baptist minister and Millerite preacher, published an article in the Millerite magazine Hope of Israel in which he argued that the true biblical Sabbath is on the seventh day of the week. Preble was the first Adventist to advocate the seventh-day Sabbath in print, and the article helped to convert Joseph Bates, along with other future Seventh-day Adventists. But sadly, Preble renounced the seventh-day Sabbath in 1847. And that was a slightly bittersweet week in Adventist history.
Thanks for watching ANN. Join us next week for more news from the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
In the meantime, did you know you can show ANN video headlines in your church or school? Just go to news.adventist.org, click on any video, and select Download Video in the bottom right-hand corner.
Our good news for the week comes from Matthew. The passage says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the end of the world."
That's our program for this week. And remember, you can always visit news.adventist.org for daily news and videos. Until next time, God bless.